Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lanzer. This is SandDAO 70. We've reached 70 episodes. Today we'll be going over an update to SIP-39, the DAO pause. This is an after action report of what has already transpired. We're just going to be taking a look into the particulars of what has happened, and it'll be a little bit of commentary. I do not represent the Sandbox Game or the Sandbox Foundation. I'm not your financial or legal advisors, and nothing I say is to be taken as financial or legal advice. When I say the word SIP, I mean Sandbox Improvement Proposal. When I use the word DAO, I mean Decentralized Autonomous Organization. And if I use the word SandFam, I'm talking about Sandbox community, those who participate in the people, product, and purpose of the Sandbox ecosystem. That ecosystem looks a little bit like this. And the people sector, there's everywhere from gamers to the Sandbox team. And product, we have everything from the game client to the DAO itself. Purpose is the white paper and all the expressions of that in Sandbox or Sebastian Bourget, Arthur Madrid, Yatsu, and now Robbie Young. And all that makes the ecosystem go round and round. Today's episode is about the DAO itself. And if you want to learn more about the DAO, kind of see a gamified version of it, go to the DAO Education Hub located at 2-154. It's down the bottom left corner of the map right next to Jurassic Park World. You'll see Sandbox DAO, and inside the Sandbox DAO, you can click for the DAO Education Hub. So my name's Lanzer. I am host for SandDAO podcast. It's all about the Sandbox DAO. And I lead the Meta Worlds group, which we have done quite a number of SIPs. And we built the Sandbox DAO Education Hub, the one we just showed you. And yeah, generally floor droppers, some other experiences like that. So, SIP-39, some context. It starts in SandDAO 67 when we do a reaction to the announcement of the DAO pause. Then in SandDAO 68, we interview Sebastian Bourget, co-founder of the Sandbox and global brand ambassador. This is part 2 of our interview that we started with him back in SandDAO 8 or 9 as a special council member. Then in SandDAO 69, we do a review and read through of the SIP itself, talk about the particulars of what it's trying to say, what it wants to do. And now we're in SandDAO 70, an update of the DAO pause now that the vote has ended and the results have been tallied. A little bit of brief history. Back in August 2025, TSB realignment starts. TSB is the Sandbox. Realignment starts with Arthur Madrid and Sebastian Bourget departing their positions as COO and CEO of the Sandbox, and ushering in Robbie Young as the new CEO. Robbie Young was the investment lead of Animoca Brands. Is unsure which one, and it was first reported by the Big Whale in August, and then was quickly seized upon by other news outlets like Gaming Daily, Telegraph, Cointelegraph broadcast. A number of statements were made out after that, kind of tampering things down, saying it wasn't a hostile takeover because Animoca Brands already owned the Sandbox, which we investigated that and revealed it back in SandDAO 34, birth of the Sandbox DAO. And then Robbie Young came out and did an X space, spoke a little bit on podcasts and articles, blockchain gamer and stuff like that. So gave his idea of what the vision would be, and you can take a look at SandDAO 67 reaction to the DAO pause, where I cover those AMAs, and back in December and the one last month in February. So that started all in August 2025. Then we covered in SandDAO 67 also, we covered the December 2025 AMA with the new CEO, Robbie Young. I just realized, so sorry, I had his name. Need to fix his name. It's not Robbie, it's Robbby. I'm so sorry. So we're going to fix that. Okay. And December 2025, there was an AMA with the new CEO, Robbie Young. We covered that. That was the one that had a recording with which we could look through and hear his vision for Sandbox 3.0. Then we did a little bit of diving into his LinkedIn, where it showed he was the CEO of investments at Animoca Brands, been in a Sandbox position for about 6 years now in some sort of director capacity. So not new to the Sandbox. Then we covered the AMA in February 2026 with the Sandbox team and the DAO administrator over SIP-39. Unfortunately, the replay bug struck, and we were not able to view the recording of that, although I was there listening in person, and I covered my thoughts resulting from that. And then this ex post by Sebastian talked about SIP-39 and wanted to recognize the contributions of SandFam to the ecosystem and reiterated the Sandbox 3.0 vision, mainly centered around corners, sand chain, and some AI and mobile components that are inbound and going to be launched. So that led to SandDAO 68, where we interviewed Seb and we talked about how the special counsel and advisory board maintained a low profile the past 1.5 years that they were in the elected seats, which they were elected in SIP 1, 2, or 3, the very, very beginning of the DAO back in May of 2024. And then with the benefit of eyesight, was there any decisions he would have done different? We also covered the AMA and if he could restate what prompted SIP-39 to pause the DAO. Then we talked about the term expiration of the special counsel and advisory board and if he was able to give us some insight into what led to the postponing of those elections. Then we talked about the DAO pause and discontinuing the special counsel and advisory board and why that was the preferred path. We then delved into what insights he could share about the Sandbox's decision to use its voting power. There will be some particulars about that we discovered in the way it voted in SIP-39. And then the situation, how it was natural to feel fear and uncertainty and what he could do to comment on that situation. Okay, and then in SandDAO 69, we did a read through of the SIP itself, but while it was had just started undergoing voting, and noted some particulars about some things that stuck out to me. Mostly the SIPs that were being canceled, how the ecosystem was rapidly evolving, and consolidation of resources, and a pausing of SIPs. Go back to SIP SandDAO 69 to listen to that read through. And what didn't make sense, which is why they wanted to pause the DAO and limit resources when they could do that already, since the DAO administrator could just slow the SIPs down or not invite any new people, which was already happening long before this SIP was introduced. They were heavily curating the SIP process, and we kind of explained that in SIP and SandDAO 69, where we compared the old process back in May 2024 when it was a free and open, where anybody could really submit a SIP. Then the new SIP process that happened in October 2024, which elongated the process and made it more of an invite only SIP process system. Covered that in episode 35, SandDAO 35. Okay. And we briefly covered the kind of an accounting sheet that I'd prepared that went through all of the SIPs and what their cost was. I'm going to delve more deeply into that in the next episode, SandDAO 71, where we do a review of the Sandbox DAO. Now that 39 SIPs later, it looks like the DAO is going to be paused for the foreseeable future. And we did a little bit of, I had my own calculations that I shared via the forums and X. Cyril came back and responded with his perspective on how he believed the final number to be more about $900,000 versus mine was was closer to $4 million, where we started with $7 million. We'd spent $2 million. So I projected that we still had $4 million left. However, Cyril projected 900,000, and most likely that's due to volatility, the differences between our calculations. But I'll go over that in the next episode when we review the Sandbox DAO. But let's get into today. Today is a review of SIP-39 and the results. We're going to be going, there's 3 sections of snapshot, the overview, the votes, and the discussion. And here is an ex post by the Sandbox DAO, which talks about how they published SIP-39, and it was back in January 28th. The SIP outlined a pause of the Sandbox DAO SIP intake, programs, and operations to create space to reassess how governance can best support ecosystem as the Sandbox 3.0 evolves. So that happened. Now let's take a look at the snapshot, and we will record our notes as that happens. So if you go to snapshot, go to the Sandbox DAO, SIP-39, here we are. It started February 10th, and it ended February 25th, about 10 days ago. And the results were yes. Yes did win out at 80% of the vote, 56 million. Abstain was about 11% of the vote, with 7.6 million abstained. And no was about 9% of the vote, with 6.3 million abstained. It's not going to take long for you to realize how suspicious those numbers are. It's for good reason that there's suspicion there. But quorum was definitely met at 233%. Quorum was only 30 million. But because the Sandbox DAO voted, it reached quorum. All right, so let's go to, so that was the overview. And again, go back to SandDAO 69 for a read through of that. All the stuff that the SIP was about. So we're going to go straight to the votes here and start looking at how the votes tallied. So right off the bat, you see here is a vote for 53 million voting power, which accounts for 75% of the vote. It was a yes vote, and that is almost certainly the Sandbox DAO or the Sandbox wallet, which Robbie Young had specified in the AMA from February that the Sandbox intended to vote. It voted yes, but it voted with 53 million, which is way more than it's usually had. Normally, it clocks in about 28 million voting power. So imagine most of our surprise when we see 53 million. And it didn't take long to figure out why that was. So if you go through here, all of the voting power you see, the Whale DAO voted, they abstained, and they had about 7.6 million VP. I voted for no, that we should continue the DAO and that it's possible to continue governing as a community while still meeting the budget conscious needs of Sandbox 3.0 as described by Robbie Young, who's the new CEO. I still feel that we could have continued the DAO and we would have been able to meet all the cost objectives that were needed. So, yep. And then Shanti voted for yes. He did want to pause the DAO. He said, there's a lot I want to say, but I think we should revive the project first and then start over. But he had 2.6 million voting power, which right away didn't tell me that something was wrong because I had forgotten that he had more than that. However, so KCL voted no. He wanted to pause the DAO. And he said that was because the decision was taken behind closed doors, and whatever the community decides, TSB will go against it. They already removed their voting power delegation to official delegates. And that's what tipped me off that something was wrong, because I didn't realize that KCL, I knew KCL had way more than 2 million. I think he clocked in like 5 million whenever he voted. So when I saw that 2 million, and then I saw his explanation here that TSB removed the voting power delegation to official delegates, that's when it clicked for me how the Sandbox wallet was voting with 53 million. That's because there were 12 official delegates. And if we go to sandboxdao.com, when that pops up, uh-oh, is the website gone? Oh, I just was at the wrong website. So sandboxdao.com, not the Sandbox DAO. If you go to delegation here at the top here, you'll see in the delegation dashboard, there are 12 delegates. Hidden Walls, Shanti, Kachado, Robbie, Mofat, Sebga, Biversanart, Moez, Hishmad, Secret Meow, Batman, Hervé. We interviewed most of these in earlier SandDAOs. But if you start looking at the voting power, you'll see a lot of them start dipping below 2 million after the third one. And it becomes very obvious very fast that the voting power here was taken from these delegates. Each of them were granted 2 million voting power by being official delegates of the Sandbox DAO. And here you are with Mofat having 448,000 rather than 2,448,000. Sebga had 300,000, Biversa 158, Moez 61, Hishmad 41, all the way down to Hervé with 5.4 thousand rather than 2,540,000. So there, that's 24 million voting power that the Sandbox DAO took from the 12 delegates and added to its own wallet. So that immediately skewed the vote to almost a certain yes. And it made a lot more sense why we were seeing 53 million voting power. They didn't tell us that they were going to do this. It feels really shady and really disappointing. It's a really bad look for that this happened. Not sure why they decided the need to do this. Actually, yes, I do know because we were able to do some math to figure out what would have happened if they had not taken delegation away from the official delegates. Anyways, we'll keep going. There are 33 votes in all. KCL, as I mentioned, voted no. He wanted to continue the DAO because of the closed door nature of the decision. I agree with that. Sebka said 40% yes, 60% no, and that's in French. So let's see if I can translate. There we go. Translating to English from French, Sebka said, no shutdown desired, agreement on the fact of suspending the new SIPs for the duration of a reorganization. Shutting down the DAO would be a step backwards. The question is what to do next. And he voted with 460,000. He was a delegate, so he should have 2,460,000 rather than 400. A well-known voice voted no. Vox Machina Studios also voted no. Hishmad voted yes. And unidentified wallets voted yes, 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 yes. And Secret Meow, another delegate, voted 50% yes, 50% abstain. Batman, a delegate, voted no. Schwarzenegger voted yes. Axura voted no. OX Digger voted no. Malamaya voted no. An unnamed wallet voted yes. Leo Fat voted yes. 2 unnamed wallets, 1 voted no, 1 voted yes. Dancing Sweater voted no. His reason was keep the sandbox. Board and 8 voted no. B. Parlin voted no, said that this is a proposal that includes no single word about no option. In democracy, in order to propose something, you should equally inform expected results of yes and expected results of no, so voters can decide transparently. I just voted another no and another DAO, and it looks like we are experiencing a no season of the DAOs. Handing over entire project feels not right to many people. Time will show, but I hope Soul of Blockchain wins. That was B. Parlin. An unnamed wallet voted yes. Sineva voted no. That's a really cool name, by the way. Zulu voted yes. Mo voted yes. Reefy voted yes. That was a fun name. And Red Lily Rose, also uh, well known in the community, voted no. And Vitalik BTC voted no. So there you have it. The 33 votes. The vast majority of people voted no, but the no as in continue the DAO. But Sandbox's wallet voted yes to pause the DAO, and they had 53 million versus the no's are 6.3 million. But there is something peculiar about that we're going to go over right now. So, as shown, it was created February 10th, ended February 25th. The results were yes, 56 million, 80%, abstain, 7.6 million, which is 11%, and no, 6.3 million, which is 9%. The 14-day period, that was normal. Glad that they let it go for 14 days. However, that 56 million versus 6 million was highly suspect from the beginning. And we were able to snapshot.eth covered it as well, which is really cool to see how they talked about the Sandbox DAO voting to pause their DAO indefinitely. That was really, really nice of them to cover this. So here it is. Let's do a little bit of math. So the Sandbox DAO wallet, or the Sandbox wallet, voted 53.1 million yes to pause the DAO. All right, so that was SIP-39. And it was immediately suspicious because in SIP-11, when it last voted, it voted with 27 million voting power. So they normally they didn't vote. It was a policy for the Sandbox wallet not to vote on proposals, and this time they decided they wanted to vote for it. But you can see the huge disparity. All right, so what would have happened? And that was because they took 24 million voting power from their delegates and added it to the Sandbox wallet. Yes. So we did a little math. I did a little math. Went to the delegate dashboard and compared with the votes who was actually who voted yes, who voted no. And by the way, while I was there, let's go back to the website. While I was there, discovered that if you scroll all the way down, normally there is a video here of delegations from the official Sandbox DAO YouTube channel. That's where Digging in the Sand podcast is. The video was unavailable, and when I looked at the channel itself, it looks like the channel was removed, deleted. So the Sandbox DAO official YouTube channel is gone, making my podcast the only Sandbox DAO channel left. So I started before the Sandbox DAO podcast Digging the Sand started, and I'm still here after they ended, which is interesting. But in any case, that was fascinating. I didn't expect that was the case. But so let's go back to the math. The Sandbox DAO voted with 53 million. It did that by adding 24 million voting power and taking 24 million voting power from the delegates. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 delegates voted. That meant 6 delegates did not vote. So there's your 24 right there, and added it to itself. So let's do a little math to figure out what would have happened. And it's abstain. So that's 1 million for yes and 1 million for abstain. And Batman voted for 100% no. So that's 2 million for no. So if you put all that together, you've got a 48% leaning of yes, a 43% leaning toward no, and an 8% leaning for abstain by the delegates. All right, so it's slightly yes favor, right? Not quite 50-50, but it is pretty close there. Half the delegates seem to want to pause the DAO, the other half, slightly more than half, want to continue the DAO. So if we apply that to the remaining 6 delegates who didn't vote, that would be 5.7 million toward yes, 5.1 million toward no, and 900,000 abstain, which is the division of that remaining 12 million. So if we apply that math to the voting result, right, 56 million on yes, 6.3 million on no, and we take away the we take away the 24 million, and so we're going to do that by 56 million. Yes. So take away that whole, um, if we deduct the TSB's vote, which is 53 million, all right, that leaves 3 million yes. If we add in the 24 million voting power by the delegates, that would be 11.5 million for yes, 1.9 million for abstain, and 10.3 million for no. I remember the Sandbox wallet shouldn't be voting. That was been the policy, the official policy by Seb Bourget for forever. So that's why we removed the Sandbox wallet's vote. So that without the Sandbox wallet vote, only 3 million voted yes. But if you add in all the delegates per the percentage that we just went over, 48% yes, 43% no, 8% abstain, then you would end with 14.5 million yes vote, 9.5 million abstain vote, and 16.6 million no vote. So that would have been a 36% yes, 23% yes, and 41% no. The no vote would have won. If the Sandbox wallet hadn't have voted, and if it hadn't have taken the 24 million voting power away from the community, the no vote would have won, which would have meant the Sandbox DAO would have continued. So it's very clear the community wanted the no vote. They wanted to continue the DAO. So I thought that was really fascinating. So kind of our takeaway there was that SIP-39 would have failed without the Sandbox wallet's 53 million vote. The Sandbox DAO revoked 24 million of approved delegate voting power and added it to itself, the Sandbox wallet. Dig in the Sand YouTube channel videos are no longer available. Deleted account. So there's some takeaways from the voting section. Now let's look at the discussion. Really disappointing showing from the votes. We could live with the Sandbox DAO, the Sandbox voting with its 27 million. At least we'd have a fighting chance. But taking away the 24 million official delegates, that was just a bad look. It's against Web3 values, and I was not happy to see that, as most of the community was very unhappy to see that happen. And here we are. Okay. So let's now go into the latter portion, which is the discussion. So if you go to the discussion, you go to, it'll take you to the forums. And here in the forums, you can kind of see how the discussion went. All right. So it was posted January 28th, and we did this read through. The only addition here in the forums that wasn't on the snapshot was the picture at the very bottom, which was status on the current SIP. It showed all of the SIPs and the payment statuses of all of them. I'm going to incorporate this into the next SandDAO podcast where we review the Sandbox DAO itself from beginning to end. But you'll see here all of the, Chrysalis Quest, NFT collection, Metaversity Campus, Magic Realms, Land Estate Cells, Metaverse Odyssey. All right, I immediately, the same day, posted a response saying that I believe if we continue with special council elections, which special council term expired 31 December and the elections were not held. So we knew something was wrong at that point, and I kept advocating, as the rest of the community, kept advocating for the continuance of the special council. We need community elected leadership so that we can continue the DAO and render good governance. But that didn't happen. So I said, I believe if we continue with special council elections, we can have a community involved reassessment that aligns with the new direction the Sandbox is going. My vote is to continue the DAO. All right, so that received a number of upvotes here. Kami came in after that and said, I have mixed feelings. With very little info on the Sandbox 3.0, it's hard to see what's in store for the Sandbox. The game maker is the best it's ever been. There are awesome new features that builders are just now figuring out how to use and realize the creative visions they've had for years. 3.0 is an unknown, at least to Kami. It is a new engine maker. Is it a new engine maker? Question mark. Will anything we've built in Vox Edit and Game Maker work in 3.0? Should creators keep on working in the existing tools, or is this a waste of time that will shut down in the coming months? This is Kami speaking. So he believed that pausing the DAO will be a major shift that will render old projects useless. These are his words. And goes on to talk about Game Maker, Metaverse Chat and Game Client, how there were only 4 players online, and made his self disclosures about his involvement and looking forward to running for special counsel. I was going to run for special counsel as well. And his vote was on the fence. He wanted to know more about 3.0 and if it was worth waiting for, or if there was still work to be done here and now. He didn't want to see the DAO paused, draining further momentum from the sandbox. And I totally agree with that. Yeah, so that received a lot of upvotes as well. 12. Even more than my 8. Yule, another prominent voice in the community, said, "Without a doubt, it's a very difficult decision, and I strongly share Kamisa's sentiment. In our case, we are already preparing the final deliveries for Chrysalis Quest. It's no secret that the Sandbox is implementing rapid changes across the board, forcing projects to constantly reevaluate how to function best within the ecosystem without compromising their initial planning." And he talks about how, as a studio, he had decided to stop developing games given the lack of clarity. He agreed that the DAO should currently serve as a funding tool for high quality users acquisition and the creation of games, tools, experiences that maximize brand recognition in the gaming market. Also talked about how, with the recent launches of Sandchain, Corners, and upcoming products that don't seem actively linked to the game ecosystem, we see with deep concern what appears to be a deliberate strategy to gradually move away from the creator ecosystem in search of new markets. And then his very last comment was, "With that said, I believe it is fundamental to bring more information regarding the future of the sandbox to the table to make an informed decision. Relying on launch speculations and tweets is not enough for such a critical move." And I agree with that as well. But yeah, there was no Robbie Young, when he did the animes, talked very openly about moving away from user generated content in the metaverse, wanted to explore corners, Sandchain, and broaden the whole thing. I responded back to Kami saying I agree wholeheartedly, and as a bonus, I think a community elected special counsel would facilitate the needed insight into Sandbox 3.0, and the community would feel like it's following along and be more supportive. That received a lot of upvotes, as did Yule's response. So far, a lot of upvotes for a lot of the folks saying to continue the DAO. Victorin, a well-known voice in the community from Sandbox Africa, said, "We've come too far to call this a pause or anything close to it. The Sandbox has delivered tangible outcomes." And Victorin came in through the Sandbox DAO grant proposal. He was in my domain and I loved Victorin. He did a great job. So he said communication between the Sandbox and its community has been weak. Talked about how the DAO changed the narrative. It brought structure, accountability, and hope. Also went on to say the pausing the DAO risks undoing that progress. And for that reason, he's voting no. The Sandbox should remain active and be iterated on, not paused. Another high amount of upvotes. I completely agree with him. Shant said that I voted yes. We cannot afford to wait until the end of the quarter. We must stop immediately upon the vote. The DAO has no meaning when the Sandbox platform itself is not functioning properly. It makes no sense to play government without any citizens. When he's referring to users, he said, "We must immediately halt all inefficiencies and prioritize reviving the Sandbox first. Let's normalize the platform and win the survival battle. Only then can we rebuild a truly meaningful DAO that fits the Sandbox. Now is the time to go all in and the turnaround for survival." He had 2 upvotes on that one. And it's very clear that it's heavily weighted by the community to continue the DAO. But Shant has been a well-known voice. I highly respect Shanti in this. And he and I don't see eye to eye or don't fully agree on our vote. I respect his position. I understand where he's come from. Sebga, another well-known voice and is a delegate, just like Shanti was, said that at first I was leaning toward voting yes and favor the pause. However, now that I see the pause would last one full year, it feels excessive. To me, that only suggests one thing: the end of the DAO. I may be wrong, but I'm concerned this could simply be a way to quietly make the DAO fade away, and Amoka might be uncomfortable dealing with it. I agree with what he's saying. And then he went on to say, have you ever seen a DAO truly function with an Animoca project? I'm far from knowing everything. Animoca Brands is huge, but among the projects I follow, none really have an active DAO, or if they do, never actually been used. I'm involved in, this is not his words, me. I'm involved with the Sandbox DAO, Star Atlas DAO. I was involved with ApeCoin DAO, and a number of other DAOs. A lot of them are struggling with participation, but the Star Atlas DAO has an active council. We do open public meetings every week that we broadcast and live stream, and it's going really well. The community loves it, and it holds us accountable. And also, the momentum we build is phenomenal. It's keeping the DAO going, and I think the same thing should have been done here with Sandbox. Having a well-known brand like the Sandbox have an open, transparent special counsel that build in public, that would have been a recipe for success. It was working in the Star Atlas DAO, and that's much smaller by comparison. Okay, Subgo went on to say the idea of forcing a shutdown raises many unanswered questions. He also talked about agreeing with Victor and his point about how difficult it is to build a strong relationship of trust with users. He also said, honestly, I'm not sure what the right move is. I understand Shanti's point, and it does make sense. There's little value in forcing things if the product isn't ready. Then talked about in that context, and given the Animoca Brands has no obligation other than a moral one to maintain the DAO, we don't really have much choice but to follow the direction being taken. That said, regardless of the outcome of the vote, there's one thing I believe should absolutely be put on the table: a clear, simple, and detailed report of the funds distributed and the return on investment. A straightforward comparison, promises versus reality. And that was from Subga. Received a number of votes. Daddy Mufasa said, my vote is to continue the DAO. Received a lot of votes. And DAO, who also is known as the intern, a delegate, said, it's been a minute since I posted anything. Quite frankly, the last major retrenchment of staff was the final nail in the coffin for me, and I suspect many others. I've lost the community that we have over here in Singapore, as well as many globally that I met over the course of 3 years. I've stopped building on Game Maker ever since, and have only ever peeked into Sandbox's main page once in a while to see if life still exists there. I'm still in the metaverse though, mainly playing user-generated games on Roblox. And to be honest, I feel both pity and sadness that the Sandbox could have been the Roblox in the crypto space. The expectation was never for Sandbox to overtake Roblox, but be a force to be reckoned with. I believe many of us hoped for this. We sure did. Intern. He said, he then went on to say, my suspicion is that once the DAO closes, it'll likely never reopen. Talked about how much it breaks his heart to say, I think it's a good idea to return the DAO to TSB. Also talked about how allowing new management to decide on the direction of the organization, and then we decide if we want to stay. And ended with, I do hope that they stay the course of the Sandbox, the metaverse, but it's anyone's guess at this point. Season 7 is coming, but what happens after, I doubt we'll have clarity anytime soon. Sanctum then said that I'm interested in knowing what the Sandbox is deciding for 2026. A clear roadmap will help creators. I responded with, the Sandbox roadmap went offline, and I showed a picture of that when I tried to go back to the public roadmap that it had. The board turned private, so we're no longer able to see the Sandbox roadmap. That was a surprise. I hadn't seen it. I hadn't looked at it in a month or two, but yeah, a lot of people expressed their surprise at that, as did I. I responded back to the intern about having the same suspicions that it'll likely never reopen if it closes. And I also commented on how ApeCoin DAO did something similar. Yuga Labs did something similar with ApeCoin DAO, where they closed it down and they forced the vote. And I think that was a bad misstep on Yuga Labs' part by pausing the ApeCoin DAO. And they have been struggling. Yuga Labs, has been struggling with participation in their ecosystem ever since. And I used Grok, I used ChatGPT to kind of run some numbers to see how their participation went. And it's been down, I think, something close to 30%. The likes, reposts, the comments, all of the discussions in ApeCoin community. And it traces back to the loss of attention and ownership of a community who no longer has a reason to engage in the Yuga system every day. It's more of just like a check in. Whereas when you owned part of the ApeCoin DAO, you had a reason to, you had a stake in it. Your vote, your delegation, your alliances, your proposals, you had a lot of reasons to be involved every day. A lot of X spaces happened because of it. A lot of attention. But ever since that, now it's just been kind of like other side and some other fan made projects, but they there's a lot of momentum that's been lost because of it. And I think that's about to happen to the sandbox. I wish we would have continued it. And then talk about how I hope Robbie is being advised by people who understand the DAO's ability to produce results, like the Sandbox DAO Grants Program, the NFT collection, curation of DAO Education Hub, and the Magic Palette. There have been some big hits, some big successful hits, but it gets the feeling that Robbie isn't being advised by Robbie, the new CEO, isn't being advised through people who understand the DAO's ability to produce results. It's not clear to me that many people within the Sandbox company do understand the DAO and the power that can be wielded by people in the community to augment almost free of cost the Sandbox game company. So that was a bummer. And then I talked about how the Star Atlas DAO, which I'm special counsel for the Star Atlas DAO, I was elected now in the second term. We've hosted in 9 months we hosted 37 public meetings over in the Star Atlas DAO, and we get about an average of 11 attendees and 15 stream viewers each time we live stream it. And that's a game only with 1,000 monthly active users, whereas the Sandbox had, at one point had over 1 million. So um, right now it looks like 20 to 60,000 per chat GPT that the Sandbox has. So we could have 3-4 times the amount of meeting participants and viewers, and that's just more content, more attention economy that would benefit the Sandbox itself. And so I have a little dashboard that we are tracking over in Star Atlas DAO, all the accomplishments we made, 149 of them, 149 accomplishments that impacted the Star Atlas ecosystem in a positive way, and overseeing payments and increasing the the Star Atlas DAO voting participation as one of our goals. We wanted something close to 50 million, 80 million participation every proposal, and we reached that almost every single time. So yeah, it's definitely doable, and it is being done in other DAOs, and it's something that could happen here with the elections that were supposed to happen on by January 1st. Hishmad then responded and said, "I'm invested in the Sandbox, and we believe in decentralized governance done right." He would be voting in favor of the proposal because he believed that we reached a point where a pause is essential. And as an entrepreneur, Hishmad believed that the most strategic move is to safeguard the remaining resources by suspending activity as proposed. By Verson, and Hishmad's a verified delegate. By Verson then responded, he's also a verified delegate, that TSB is undergoing some serious downsizing. It's felt in every field: staff reductions, closure of country representative of offices, and even reducing the number of honorable mentions and game jams. So, Byverson is not surprised to see the DAO being discontinued. Talks about TSB numbers and not making a profit. Talks about development tools are better than ever, but they are worse compared to their competitors. Talked about an outlook of the last 5 years with Game Maker and the DAO's community interaction. Talks about the new management wants to solve many problems, and TSB is more than a sick man as it seems from the outside. And unless TSB is operated on, It's unlikely to survive. So one asked if there would be a roadmap, would there be programs and change? And in short, even though Biverson is undecided, the yes side outweighs the current situation. I responded back, did a little calculation, and thought that we had received about 6.8 million in USDC from the Sandbox Game Company as an endowment. We spent 2.3 million across 38 SIPs, and we had 4.4 million left. So I thought that we could safely involve the DAO and keep the DAO going for less than 200,000 USDC a year, and this is nothing to our remaining $4.4 million budget. So I wanted to continue the DAO because of that. Ishmael responded back to me and said agrees with the perspective, but to clarify his understanding, wanted to know if the 6.8 million from the sandbox is structured as a grant or accountable debt. And spoiler alert, it was a grant, not accountable debt. And Ishmael also said, furthermore, I'm a bit advocate for voluntary governance if there's an appetite for it. And I'd like to volunteer his time. I'm sure there are others in the community who'd be willing to join me in pro bono capacity. Yeah, myself included. Xura said, I think we need more information before deciding which route we're going to take. And then posted the AMA that at the time was about to happen in February with Sebastian Bourget, Cyril, Robbie Young, also Panda Pops was there. And I responded back to Hishmad. I wasn't sure at the time if it was grant or accountable debt. The 15.5 million sand that was given, that was about the 6.8 million USDC at the time, converted to 6.8 million. At back then, the exchange rate was 44 cents per sand, so that amounts to 6.8 million when granted 15.5 million. Ishmael said it'd be helpful to revisit the documentation, which I did that, and that's when we discovered it was a grant, not accountable debt. And said, while an unconditional grant allows for total independence, a conditional agreement means we must be diligent in respecting the sandbox's intended direction. So even though it was a grant, there still was some, Sandbox wallet put their thumb on the scale to make sure that the yes vote would be obtained. I responded back and said I didn't see any indication that this was a loan, and as I have learned from 8coin DAO and Star Atlas DAO, who are both foundation companies in the Grand Cayman Islands, the originating company could impose their own restrictions simply by controlling the wallet or having a separate service agreement. So that's just my reading of their documents that are public, and discovered that there was still a measure of control that both companies could exert on the foundation companies. Just because they're separate companies in separate countries doesn't mean that there isn't a degree of control there. Hishmat said, thanks for the clarification. Cyril's proposal is transparent, and it's clear that the TSB management team has thoroughly vetted the potential impacts. If we're to maintain the DAO, we must have a compelling justification that aligns with the TSB strategic goals. Asked what further reasons can we provide to bolster our position before the discussion, and suspected that TSB's 3.0 strategy might be headed in a different direction than what I was suggesting, I mean Lanzer. To make this more persuasive, do you have a more robust or compelling reason we should present that bridges the gap? And I said, there are 3 reasons. Reason 1, or reason A, was that no new SIPs and governing bodies were not codependent on each other. We could have a governing body without stopping the no new funding SIPs. As in, we could stop funding new SIPs and still have governance bodies. We didn't need to halt both at the same time. And reason B was the continued exclusion of community nominated bodies will increase community frustrations and repeat missing the mark with the community. So, for example, the first special counsel and advisory board, they were all nominated by the internal corporate deliberations and proposed to the community in SIPs 1, 2, and 3. They were nominated by the Sandbox Game Company and resulted in an intense outrage in the beginning. And ever since then, the special counsel and advisory board were largely silent throughout. They didn't do any building in public. They didn't have any public meetings, and so we had the DAO was absent their leadership. And if they had been more present, think that that would not have been quite so hard on the community. Reason C, the third reason, was the continued over-reliance on internal corporate deliberations will repeat the cycle of misapplied solutions. Long-standing community sentiment is that the decisions are handed down from on high from a closed system and the Sandbox Game Company, which consistently sidesteps the necessary process required for precise fulfillment of community needs. The example is conducting multiple restricted X spaces where only corporate individuals and unfamiliar key opinion leaders are invited on stage. So some of the AMAs that were held, most the ones I'm thinking right now, is when they did the SIP on funding funding the Sandbox ambassadors. It was a closed X space. There wasn't much community involvement. It was just a one way PR meeting where they said some things, they talked about some things. I covered that in a Sandbox DAO episode, and my disappointment that it was a closed meeting. They handed it down, what they want us to know, and there was no real discussion about it. It was really disappointing. And the AMAs for this SIP were the same. The No one from the community was really invited on stage to talk or ask questions. And the discussion here in this thread, as you can see, the Sandbox account is silent. You're about to hear from Cyril and the Sandbox account after the AMA, but they make a few posts and they don't respond back. So this is the community responding to itself, having to having to figure itself out and deal with not having any leadership really present. So those are my three reasons. Hishmad responded back to me and said, seeking more clarity on reason A, but he does find B and C to be very straightforward and he's fully aligned with them. So thank you, Hishmad. Cyril responded back and said, just to correct some data, the 15.5 million sand was a donation with no strings attached, not a loan. It was never swapped to USDC from the get-go. So you remember that the first SIP was only payable in sand, and most of our treasury remained in sand. It was swapped tactically when the exchange rate was favorable and to pay for certain bills or SIP that would build in fiat, ETH, or USDC. With sand being at 10 cents, what is effectively left in the vault today is 891,000 USDC, not 4 million. And this is not taking into account the bills that are left to pay for this year to maintain the system. So I guess I understand if everything is still in sand, I get uh, the protective stance by the Sandbox company and the admin team if they didn't swap it to USDC back when the exchange rate was better. So that kind of that's a bummer. It's a big bummer that instead of the 4 million that I calculated, and I calculated it at the time it was given as an endowment back when that 44-cent exchange rate. So 4 million then. But if you take into account what's left and at an exchange rate of 10 cents, Cyril is saying that what's left is 891,000, not the 4.4 million that I calculated. So that was a good discussion point. Shanti then posted a summary of the AMA with for on SIP-39 with the CEO, and that was one of the only summaries that we got. I didn't think to record it, and the recording bug hit, so we didn't have a recording of it. But I did cover that back in, as I mentioned earlier, I did cover those AMAs in SIP number, or not SIP, in SandDAO 67, um, a reaction to the DAO pause. Okay. So Sean T talked about how the AMA summary was the core objective was to pause DAO operations to reallocate resources toward a core product development and AI driven innovation, and cited resource optimization, operational shift, AI creator tools. Existing SIPs will be paused. Existing SIPs, most would be approved. Most approved SIPs would be honored, although 3 of them would be discontinued. My biggest disappointment was the the NFT curation one by Arth Morton and his team, which is making the DAO money, was paused. Also, the land sales, which would have made it it's possible to trade estates in a secure and safe manner using the already integrated GBM system. That was paused, which was a big bummer. Those who have estates know how hard it is to trade and sell them. We have to do it through pretty unsafe methods. But having an in-house sandbox exchange, trade, or buy sell for estates would have been really helpful. Uh, Okay. The Sandbox account did respond after that and said, "Thank you for your comment, Hishmad. We hope today's AMA helps shed some more light on the road ahead for the Sandbox," which it did. SIP-39 is intended to be both operational and strategic. It pauses SIP intake, programs, and operations to preserve the DAO's asset and ensure it is best positioned once it's determined how the DAO should contribute in the context of the Sandbox's evolving ecosystem and what the best future model should be. That was a very PR answer. Um, yeah, we need more from the Sandbox. We need them to engage more with the community. And yes, the community is angry. You need to internalize that and persist through that tension. The most of the anger comes from the lack of transparency, and messages like these are very corporate heavy, very one way. I was talking about earlier in my three reasons when I was talking with Hishmad, and it's not helping. Not helping. I really wish they had been a bit more involved. Cyril responded back and said, "Just confirming this is a legit Sandbox account. Be careful about an impersonator." He's referring to the Sandbox account that in one message prior. So Cyril confirmed that this is a legit account. And then I talk about the X space playback bug for the AMA that happened in February, and my quick outline that it lasted 30 minutes. Panda Pops was the host with Seb, Robbie, and Cyril as speakers. Robbie said that the point of the pause is to conserve resources while we focus our efforts on Sandbox 3.0, mainly sand chain and corners. Robbie also said the Sandbox wallet will be voting with its voting power. So he told us at that time it would be happening. Didn't tell us that the 24 million delegate power would be rescinded, taken away, and added to its wallet to heavily weight it toward yes. Cyril presented, or wanted to present. Oh, Cyril mentioned that he presented a rewritten constitution of the bylaws to the Sandbox company, but the Sandbox chose not to pursue that path, which is interesting. And I really feel for Cyril. It's clear that he is really advocating for the community here and tried to save it. But the Sandbox game company or someone in a position of power, most likely Robbie, but we don't know, said no, didn't want to go that route at this time. And the special council and advisory board elections will not be held. So those were my notes that I recorded after realizing that the playback bug hit that X space. Then I talked about going live on SandDAO podcast. So there it is. Okay. Then I responded back to Cyril, who talked about Sam being at 10 cents and the value being 891,000 USDC, not 4 million. And I said, yes, I did forget to account for the remaining value in today's value exchange rate. But it was really difficult to calculate that value because not all SIPs were cited in SAND. Some were cited in USDC and some were in euros. So it was difficult for me. I had to pull the exchange rates for each SIP when they closed and convert that day's exchange rate as the official USDC account. And uh, yeah, so I converted all of them into USDC the day the vote ended to come up with a number that I could back and that was rational to me. So that number I came up with was 460,000, which is 4.6 million times 10 cents. And I asked him if he could share his formula, and I shared mine here. This which I'll cover in the next SandDAO episode where we go through the Sandbox DAO. And then I shared my calculation sheet, which had a lot of formulas, a lot of formulas. I went through every SIP, you know, recorded the details, And then on the far right hand side is a big table of the exchange rates for that particular day. And you could see how in SIP 1 it was 44 cents, and here in SIP, um, the latest SIP 38 was 11 cents. So quite a reduction since SIP 1. The Sandbox account responded back to me and said, "Hello, Lanzer. We would like to share some clarification on reason A that I cited." So reason A, if you all don't remember, was when I said no new funding SIPs and governance bodies were not co-dependent. You could do one without the other, meaning you could continue governing without. I'm sorry, you could continue governing and pause SIPs. You didn't have to stop both. Oops. The Sandbox responded back to that and said, "Hello, Lanzer. We'd like to share some clarification on reason A. SIP-39 is not only a pause on new funding SIPs, it also pauses DAO operations and governance activity as a whole. Under SIP-39, the Special Council and Advisory Board will be discontinued along with SIPs. This also means the related activity and remuneration means payment or compensation, will stop. The Constitution remains as a reference framework, but revised to remove certain governance functions as defined in SIP-39. This was a very confusing response because my 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 post was saying that they didn't have to be all in SIP 39. You could continue governing bodies while stopping new SIPs. And the Sandbox's official account said they just reiterated what SIP 39 was. They didn't really address what I was saying. They just kind of went right past that. Not really sure. I guess they didn't really read my response. I'm not quite sure, you know, why they chose to respond like that. So the Sandbox official account then made another post and said, "At this stage, the DAO pause timeline is indefinite. The Sandbox and the Sandbox Foundation will review options that present the best future for the DAO. If and when there is a concrete proposal, which could mean reactivation or a new model, it would be shared as an update in the SIP forum thread. Until then, the DAO remains in a maintenance mode with minimal activity as defined in SIP 39. Reactivation would involve a new SIP that defines scope, mandate, governance model, and budget." So, clarification by the Sandbox account. Cyril responded back to me, and I responded back with the clarification if he could share his formula. He said, "I'm afraid the picture you're presenting is overly simplified. I'll respond briefly, but not to sidebar this thread. We've done multiple swaps throughout the life of the DAO using different rates, which makes sense that they would do that. I just don't have that data, so I don't know what those swaps were when they were made. So I'm not able to follow that logic. Did so when the market was in our favor. Sometimes also did so to pay certain bills. Applied what they call the 70-110 rule on certain SIPs, meaning we have protected the author from the sand going too low, down to 70%. Oh yeah. So I covered that in their in an earlier SandDAO episode when they came up with the new rules. When they transitioned in October 2024 to the new SIP process, they also had that 70-110 rule in place. So meaning for certain SIPs, we had to pay more sand than was intended. The 110% rule was the other way around to protect the DAO from overpaying the author. Later, we ditched that rule, deemed too complex, in favor of what we called a grant lock. We fixed the exchange rate at the time the SIP was approved and swapped to USDC directly, saved it until it was time to pay. It was mainly used for later SIPs labeled USDC, which makes sense. That is a pretty easy, more simpler method. And then he also said, Cyril did, we also had some income using Varus DeFi protocol, and for example, the work of the art NFT curation team. The final number that he gave, 891,000, is automatically calculated by ourselves, custodian software and accounting, and it's mainly made of sand, ETH, and USDC. It is the golden source and cannot be approximated by a formula. Okay. So, in light of that, I still stand by my numbers because that's the best I have to make my own calculations. And I understand Cyril had a profit and loss statement they calculated, but it wasn't able to share that, so I couldn't follow along. All right, then I responded back to the Sandbox account, who, when they responded back to me and reiterated SIP-39, I said, I understand my position is that it's possible to go through with not allowing any new funding SIPs and still continue the governing bodies of Special Counsel and Advisory Board. It doesn't have to be everything paused all at once, and the Sandbox loses very little by continuing governance. I responded back to Cyril and said, yep, makes sense that when you ditched rule, the 70-110 rule, in favor of the grant lock rule. Yes, that makes sense. Thank you for explaining, Cyril. My numbers are based off of the method that I could use um, by converting it the day that SIP was vote ended. I converted to USDC. So, converted the USDC amount for every SIP at the time it was approved. I understand that this is an accurate method. And then Cyril responded back to me, said, yeah, to be fair, he had a more direct export from the DAO's profit and loss and balance sheet. So, yeah, makes sense. And something I noticed while live streaming SandDAO 67 about a month ago, that SIP-36 land estate sales is an extremely value-added tool to the sandbox itself. And what was discussed, and what was the discussion behind including it in the canceled SIPs? I never really did get an answer to that. GBM's auction site is on the Sandbox.game's website, and it's useful to everyone with an estate. So, as a bummer, I really liked that tool. For those of you who are wondering what it is I'm talking about, it is sandbox.gbm.auction, and here you can see sandbox or sand lands, sandbox lands that are being auctioned right now. And there are quite a number of auctions that have already completed. Right, so they would have allowed estates to be securely and safely bought and sold on this website, but looks like it wasn't meant to be. All right, then I published SandDAO 67, a reaction to the DAO pause announcement about 28 days ago. Sebga then said, after all this discussion, it seems clear that going against the SIP is not the best option. If the DAO is the body of the sandbox, then the body has to follow the head. We have no interest in being a dead weight or a costly burden within the system. I will therefore vote yes. But then he edited his response to say, it seems that it's over for an indefinite period. It has been a very interesting experience, and I'm grateful to have shared it with all of you. Periods of calm and of tension are both part of the life of any living system. Thank you all for these moments of exchange, dreams, and sharing. I really love that the feeling of building something together with everyone. Nothing is set in stone. We'll see what tomorrow brings. In any case, a big thank you to you all. Totally agree, Sebga. Except the part about it seems clear that going against the SIP is not the best option. I do think it was the best option to go against the SIP and vote to continue the DAO. And then I posted SandDAO 68 after interviewing Seb Bourget, the co-founder and global brand ambassador of the Sandbox. He used to be the special counsel, so my opinion was I still think it was clear to continue the DAO with governance bodies while being budget conscious. And there it was. Lily Rose then talked about how the tail, which she referred to as the DAO, should have moved quicker to swallow the head, which was TSB, and went into her opinion about mismanagement and how the skills were about more of PR than it was for managing the company and stuff like that, which is it's an honest take from Lily. And she's a well-known community member, so I respect her position. And talked about how Roblox and Fortnite are multi-billion-dollar companies making millions for their creators, and there was no reason the Sandbox couldn't have slid into that space. Believed that if the DAO was paused, that it wouldn't come back, and voted to not pause the DAO. Right, wanted to at least run it on fumes, and advocated for selling some of the NFTs from the collection, which Arth Morton and his team was doing successfully. I covered that in previous episodes. Right. So Sandbox employed a lot of talented creatives, and I totally agree. Okay. Then Cyril posted that the SIP was open for voting. Hishmad said he voted yes, approved SIP 31, approved SIP 39, and paused the DAO. I then published SandDAO 69, which was a review of the DAO, a read through of it. Lily Rose thanked Lanzer and said voted no, put it in maintenance mode, don't pause it. I then responded about how I remember when the community felt it didn't have much influence in how the sandbox ecosystem developed. I didn't want to return back to that. This was before the DAO came out in May 2024. And the DAO to me was the single biggest change that turned that around in the community, not feeling heard and not being able to participate in the governance of the ecosystem. And the DAO was a great thing. It still is a great thing. I wish we'd continued it. Hishmad said, "Good morning, Lanzer. I totally get where you're coming from. The DAO was a huge step forward in giving the community real influence. That said, I voted yes on SIP-39 because it was proposed by the Sandbox company who seeded the DAO initially in SIPs 1 through 3 and feels like a deliberate pause to conserve resources while they push Sandbox 3.0 forward." Malamaya said, "Good morning. Haven't posted much, but I've been reading and supporting different initiatives here in the Sandbox DAO since it went live. Voted on all SIPs and through the roller coaster ride that befell the Sandbox game the past 6 years or so. I remember when it's been excited. I remember being excited for the DAO as it gave the community, SandFam, much needed sense of ownership to sway in terms of how the sandbox is shaped. We've all seen the rise and fall of creative studios. We said hello and goodbye to many people in the Sandbox team and every level. Malamayo is in agreement with the folks here that some SIFs needed pausing. There needs to be an overhaul in the management of funds, council, and protocols. Sam Malamaya is voting no for now with what little voting power Malamaya had, hoping that some of the terms could be changed in favor of continuing with the skeletal ops and reform in conjunction with the Sandbox version 3 roadmap, but dropping this thought here as an unsolicited comment and warning that this could be at worst a death sentence to the DAO, as it was for many other DAOs in the past, or at the very least a clear exit sign for those who are still around believing in the metaverse. Cheers. Cheers, Malamaya. Sebga then said, "No shutdown desired. I agree with suspending new SIPs for a time needed to reorganize. Shutting down the DAO would be a step backwards. The real question is, what would come next?" And that's why Sebga voted 60% yes and or excuse me, 40% yes to pause the DAO and 60% no and pausing the DAO. I then post that tweet from Snapshot Labs that showcased the DAO's vote in SIP-39. I thought that was really, really cool. I responded back to it on X, talking about how it felt. Yuga took this approach with 8 Point DAO, and it didn't go well. It suffered an attention economy deficit ever since, and I pulled that research from AI. And the Sandbox DAO community, which is the SandFam, can proactively evolve with the Sandbox 3.0. Couldn't find the logic in stopping the governance bodies. Also, that was about time I realized that the 12 approved delegates with their 2 million voting power each, 24 million voting power total, was rescinded and added to the Sandbox's 53 million voting power, which is a huge bummer to see. I really, really wish that they hadn't done that. That just kind of made it all worse. Xura said, "My vote is a clear no. It's disheartening to see this SIP handled in a way that clearly indicates the outcome had already been determined." And that's exactly how it seemed. Lily Rose says that, well, this sucks because the Sandbox voted yes with their massive 8 million wallet, which they have, as I showed y'all earlier, was 27 million. And the DAO didn't act quickly enough to cut its umbilical cord from the Sandbox Game Company. I agree. The progressive decentralization that Seb and Cyril briefed and talked about at NFT Paris back in May of 2024 wasn't progressively decentralized fast enough. And I responded back to Lily saying, "Agreed. I thought we had more runway than this. It's difficult to keep the faith in a situation like this. Limited communication, feelings that the controlling party is acting disingenuously. seeing a retracement back to legacy patterns of one-way street behavior, and I'm sad to see it go this way. That thing that hurts the most is knowing it didn't have to go this way. It's a real bummer. Victorin said, hello, admin team. Victorin requested clarity on the current standing of Sandbox Nigeria, which is still under admin review. Wanted some more clarity. And we've done so much work to be abandoned on that SIP. Our proof of work is massive and needs to be compensated or put into consideration. Yeah, Sam, they did a lot of good work for the Sandbox over in Africa. Victorin and the group of folks. All right, then Dancing Sweater is, I don't agree with the pause. Cyril then responded back to Victor and said, as per the framework requested via SIP-39, all new submissions are paused. Your initiative has not reached the SIP status as yet. Curation was still ongoing. Therefore, if SIP-39 comes to pass, your idea and its curation will be paused with no compensation. In the meantime, we have paused all curation pending the outcome of this SIP. As a gentle reminder, the admin team is not the author for SIP-39. We are only responsible for its execution if once it passes. So that was a reminder of how when they went to the closed invite system back in October 2024, back here in step number 2, after you've submitted to SIP idea, you submit your SIP to the Typeform link after you've been invited by the DAO admin team. Otherwise, you have to wait here in step 1. You can't proceed to step 2 unless you've been invited. So that's what they mean by SIP curation. Also could mean step 3, where you receive DAO admin team review after you've submitted your SIP in the Typeform link. So curation could be one or the other. All right, so back to it. I responded back to Cyril saying, thanks for the reminder. And Cyril, thank you very much for everything you've done. I know I've expressed my skepticism in the past. I'm sometimes the harshest critic of the lack of transparency early. And then when Digging in the Sand podcast came on and Cyril came on with Kunta and explained his rationale for the release, thinking that it was going to be a powerful momentum to launch everything at once. It made sense, and I think what really did it for me was when Cyril said that he's not a trained PR person. Like he's not, he's a builder, and he's so didn't really know how to deal with comments like mine demanding transparency and kind of noting a lot of inconsistencies. And that makes perfect sense. And I really appreciated Cyril being vulnerable like that and just coming out with the truth. It was really, really cool to see. Thank you, Cyril, for that. That really changed my opinion about a lot of stuff. Money, who was a domain allocator and also a unknown voice in the community, said, sad to see this direction. I voted against. Once paused, I do not foresee a restart, hoping for the best, though. And I then said the conversation we had all about the community council seems prophetic now. The community council was a SIP back in December 2024 and all the way to February 2025 about an elected community council, because the special council and advisory board were maintaining a low profile and didn't really participate in governance. So there was a SIP idea to create a community elected council to do working groups and stuff like that. And it went through a lot of discussion, 261 responses and posts back and forth. But ultimately it was not proceeded forward with. And yeah. So this was the post by Kunta, having been reverted, will remain for the foreseeable months. It did not progress past that point, but it was a great discussion, and we almost had a community elected council that could build momentum. So we tried very hard there. I thought the CC was a step in the right direction, and that if we don't do the community council, House of Sand was the next best option, which is kind of like a community, almost like a Congress, a parliament. But I said doing nothing until special council re-elections was the worst way to go, in my view, which is what ended up happening, and that was the way that was taken. Their House of Sand didn't proceed forward, neither did community council, and because of that, now we were faced with the pausing of the DAO and no elections for the special council or advisory board. So that was prophetic, which was a bummer. Cyril said, in response to my post about thanking him for everything that he was done, Cyril expressed his gratitude for that. If this SIP passes, which seems likely now, I'll be gone by the end of March, and I'll make sure to say goodbye. Please do, Cyril. Please do. I'll be the first one to shake your hand and thank you, congratulate you for a successful DAO. I still think it is successful. Cyril said 9 days ago, the voting period for SIP-39 ended, counted the statistics that we went over earlier, and the DAO will officially be paused by the end of March as per the terms of this SIP. The Vision X, Joseph, very well-known community member, was in SandDAO 1, no, SandDAO 2 or 3, with Crafter. There was a three-way panel that I held, or very early in the SandDAO podcast. Said, "Oh hey, a vote by one dude, decentralized." Yeah, agreed. And I responded back to Cyril. That was a bummer to see. The DAO will be officially paused. And yep, the Cyril did say, reminded me that the Sandbox did confirm in the latest X space that they will vote. However, what they did not confirm was that they would be taking the 24 million voting power away from the delegates and adding it to their own wallet. So that was a bummer. And the Vision X, Joseph, reminded us, and I'm really glad he did this, that Sebastian said in the past that it was up to the community to decide which external initiatives should or should not get funded, and recounted some of these X posts where Sebastian would say that, as we decentralize, it's up to the community to decide and how they would impact life of creators and players. It will happen. Here, let's go to the X post. All right. So this was in response at the time, in voting yes or no to SIPs back in June of 2024. This is not the one I wanted to. The main thing here was that it's up to the community to decide which external initiatives should or should not get funded and how these would impact the life of creators and players. So really emphasizing that it's up to community, right? And then Vision X said, and add to that here, where he said that no votes may result in an inaction in this DAO back when it was proposed initially. Right. So here's the X post from Sebastian saying that yes needs to win for the first phase of the DAO to operate and be able to amend the first constitution via SIPs and involve public participation. And then Vision X said, and still here, where he specifically replied to a complaint by a now formal developer in the ecosystem, where he said that he would only vote to create a quorum once the community has shown its decision. He voted against the community explicitly in this case, and it's a shame to see you lose your job because of it. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I was really bummed to see the realignment as well, but I understand there was an explanation by both Yatsu, the CEO of Animoca Brands, and Robbie Young later on. But Sebastian was saying here that the Sandbox would not vote. It and if it did, it only to establish quorum. But in SIP-39, it did vote, and it did so with a huge amount of voting power. Oh, he said click through the last sentence where he said it would happen. So let's go to that. Take a look here. So vote abstain would be is a quick solution, and that we could use optionally and only at the end once the community has shown its decision. 1 and 2 will need wins inland, so all SIPs are bound to fail unless then, regardless of their quality. Okay. So thank you for that reminder. Basically explaining that Sebastian had said Sandbox wallet would not vote unless it really had to, and mostly to abstain to get quorum. And that was it. That was the end of the discussion. 65 responses to SIP-39 in the discussion thread. So let's go back to here. All right, so I just kind of pulled the key points here for everyone who discussed. Cyril, Yule Wolf, myself, a Sandbox account, Kami, the Vision X, Exura, Lily Rose, some well-known community members. Then some of the delegates were Hishmad, Sebga, Biverson, Shanti, and Dao, otherwise known as the intern. And then some other well-known community voices like Daddy Mufasa, Victorin, Money, Malamaya, Dancing Sweater, and Sanctum. So thank you all for discussing and the SIP-39 discussion forums. And I wanted to pull out also this tweet from Arthmort, who was the DAO NFT curator, and said it was an intense journey and stewarding the NFT portfolio, and also showed the a reminder of what success they had in the NFT collection. I went over that in SandDAO, I think 67, went through just how much they had earned for the DAO. Let's actually take a look and see if we can't see that real fast. Okay, so their revenue was 400,000 that they had made for the DAO by managing the portfolio. So quite successful, in my opinion. So it was that was one of the casualties. Is SIP-26 NFT collection management for the Sandbox DAO. Another casualty was SIP-36. I talked about that earlier, which was the Sandbox estate selling tool, also known as the land estate sales, which was for the GBM plugin on the Sandbox Game website. And then also with SIP-33, which is a Sandbox Metaversity Campus, creating your learning playground. So some takeaways in the discussion, most community responses on the DAO forums were against pausing the DAO. Some felt that SandFam community did not move quickly enough to progressively decentralize. And reaction to the Sandbox taking delegate voting power away was a disappointment, and most agree was bad optics for the ecosystem. But in the end, the voting period ended, and SIP-39 passed with 80% yes, 11% no, and 9%. I'm sorry, 80% yes, 11% abstained, and 9% no. Quorum was met with 233%, and the DAO will officially be paused by the end of March per SIP-39. I didn't see any community questions in the chat. I don't really have any other open topics because that basically covers it right there. SIP-39. So episodes 1 through 70. 70 is now done. I have 2 more episodes, and then I think I will be able to pause the SandDAO podcast for as long as the Sandbox DAO is paused. So episode 71, I'll do a review of the Sandbox DAO. And then episode 72, I'll do a review of the SandDAO podcast. Then after that, I will probably pause the SandDAO podcast. All right, I normally go over the Sandbox spaces, but at this point, I'm just going to proceed past that and go into rating. So here we are. Here we are at the end. SandDAO 70, an update of the DAO pause. It was a disappointment. I'm really bummed to see it happen. And I'm hoping that it does come back, that it does unpause at some point in the future. All right. Thank you all for your time, and appreciate very much. Thank you.